I might need to save it onto my desktop real fast. Give me a moment here. This PC. Okay. Let's see if I can do it this way now. PowerPoint Live. It's not coming up in my list. I can just do it from my window if need be. How weird.
Is it? So is it not coming up on any of those?
It's not coming up like just on the PowerPoint Live list, but that's okay. I can just do it from my window. That's weird though. Like normally it just comes up on my list as the PowerPoint Live.
It might be because you were admitted weirdly today.
Maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might have been why I couldn't find it last time.
Okay, whatever. I'll just do it from my. Yeah, my window should be okay. Would it? Or would screen be better?
Window will be good.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Is that working?
I've got blank screen. Yep, there it is. Yep, if you just want to put it into the slideshow, we'd be right.
All right. I don't think we'll be able to see the presenter's notes this way. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Can you get it in? Yeah, if you do go from beginning there, it should be. Yep.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Here we go. Yep, let's start there. Awesome. Right, yeah, click on to the karakia.
Okay.
Next slide. Yep, there we go. Kia ora tātou, everybody. We'll start with our karakia for tonight. Ki raro I te korowai kaitiaki o te kitanui a tāne, mā te hau e pupui te pā kahu ki o mātou waka te kaha tāne tangaroa. Manakatia mai a tātou katoa e roto I te hikoitanga I te ao o rangi rawa ko papa. He te oranga o mato ki a pikiaki I o rawa Māori ki a toi mato I o rawa mana hui e tākie. So good evening, everybody. My name is Mari Borthwick. I am the current Senior Vice President of Essence and the Head of the Science Faculty at Freiburg High School in Palmerston North. And it's my pleasure tonight, along with a couple of other people who will introduce themselves in a moment, to be running the last of our webinars for Term 1, 2024. And if you've been with us all the way through, congratulations. So what I'm going to do is pass over. We've got a few piloteers here tonight, as well as other SNs, exec members, and some members of the ministry. So I'll just ask those people to quickly introduce themselves, and we might pass over to Najin, if you'd like to introduce yourself first of all.
Well, sure. Kia ora. So I'm Najin Brock, and if you've been to some of the webinars, my face is probably looking a bit familiar at this point. But yeah, I'm head of ESS over at Massey High School, and yeah, I've recently joined the Earth-Space Science exec team. My specialty is in astrophysics, so that's why I've been just kind of adjunct to this particular standard quite a bit. Thanks. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Piloteers. Mel, do you want to start us off?
Hi, I'm Melanie Split-Tag, and I'm TIC of Level 1 at Orewa College, and yeah, my specialty is geography, I guess. Really, earth science is my background in terms of earth and space. I'm also teaching Year 13 earth and space science. I've also got the biology and everything else on the other side, but my expertise here comes in from doing pilot last year. So yeah.
Kia ora. Rosie.
Kia ora. I'm Rosie Elsmore, Rosalind Elsmore. I work at Aotea College as a physics and biology teacher. So I teach Year 11 SPS and Year 12 physics. And I was a piloteer last year as well. So had experience of putting the students through. Yeah, thanks.
Kia ora. Thank you. Ministry, who would like to go first? Somebody
I
jump
can help
in.
in.
Right.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Paula. I'm one of the Science NCA implementation facilitators. So great to see everybody, and congratulations on making it to the last one of the term. Yay!
Rachel.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, ko Rachel Chisnell tōko ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Rachel Chisnell and I am a science and technology NIF based in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, and I've been really enjoying ESS, so it's lovely to be here. Feels like we're I don't know, it feels like we should have a party and have streamers and sit and things like that. And I feel like we should acknowledge Ben. I'll make him talk too.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah, definitely.
Thanks,
Ben.
Rachel. Kia ora koutou, ko Ben Agatuka Wingoa. I'm on the implementation team here at the National Office. Work behind Rachel and Paula. And yeah, I've been enjoying these workshops, and yeah, congratulations on reaching it to the last one.
Ngā mihi. And thanks, Ben. These obviously couldn't happen without all your technical expertise and making sure that they run smoothly. So thank you very much. You'll see on the screen our plan for tonight. We've done our introductions. We'll very quickly run through where to find resources and support for those of you who may not be familiar with that. We'll then basically have a little bit of a recap about thinking about what is required for the different grades. Looking at what each of those looks like. Have a bit of an opportunity there for some quick questions if anybody's got any. And then we're going to really look at a few exemplars from pilot materials from the last 2 years, sort of unpacking those and hopefully helping you understand a little bit more about what you're looking for in terms of responses for those different grades. Again, we'll break for any questions and then quickly run through the assessment specs and conditions of assessment before passing over to our 2 wonderful piloteers to reflect on some of their experiences over the last couple of years. So on that note, if we can flick to the next slide, please.
Yep. Sorry.
Yep, the next one. We got the next one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep, here we go. So I chose this, whoops, we can flick back one. We've gone 2 for some reason. There we go. So I picked this whakatauki for tonight. Hapai tia tiara tika pumau ai te rangatiratanga mō ngā uri whakatipu. I thought this one was really appropriate because obviously what we're wanting to do is to obviously foster tamariki in kura so that they can increase their knowledge, and to do that we obviously have to strengthen our knowledge as well in order to do that, and this hopefully will help all of us over the next so many years as we continue on this journey with this work. So moving on, just looking at where we can get resources. So there's a number of places that you can find resources. There's obviously, hopefully you're familiar with the NCEA page where you've got all your information on learning matrix, SLOs, the achievement standards, a few course outlines, and kaupapa Māori. And then you've also got your other side, your NZQA page, which provides you with your internal assessment materials, exemplars, the external assessment, assessment reports and schedules. So the links there, you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint at the end of this presentation. So you better click on those links to access those. And Essence itself has its own website. We're trying to populate it with as much as we can. So there are lots of resources available there. We've got course outlines, which were prepared at the end of last year to help you, which you can grab and either use as they are or tweak to meet your requirements. And it also provides you with a whole lot of contacts and help that you can get in order to, if you've got any questions related to anything to do with Essence. If we delve a little bit deeper into our website, click on the next one.
Mm-hmm. That go through?
go. Yep.
Okay.
So we've got a page specifically for level 1 pairs. So that contains all of the resources that we have developed to support both of the new achievement standards. So there's a lot in there, as well as obviously the recordings of these webinars and PowerPoints that go along with them. So those are all freely available to anybody. You just can access those quite easily just by either clicking on this link or even from the master page of our website. Just like to point out that currently SN's membership is free, so we encourage you to join. Obviously there's lots of news that becomes available all through the year. We also run regular face-to-face workshops within the regions. Most regions have got their own regional representative who can support you at all areas of SN's. And yeah, lots and lots of materials on there. We also provide for members examinations for level 2 and 3. And this year we will also be providing a practice car for this particular standard that we're looking at today. So that should become available later this term, and the level 2 and 3 examinations will become available by the beginning of term 3. So lots of things that you can get from becoming an SN's member. So again, just click on that link and you can join our association. Okay, so into today's kaupapa. If we click on to the next one. So many of you will have been already on some of the other webinars that we've done, so you will be familiar with the achievement criteria there for this particular standard. So what we're going to very quickly do is we're going to look at each of the step ups and sort of look at exactly what is required for each of those. And I'll give you some little just brief sort of examples of what a response might look like for those. And then from there, we can then move on to look at some student work. So if we click on to the next slide, we can look at what achievement is. So achievement states demonstrate understanding of the effect on the Earth of interactions between the Sun and Earth-Moon system. So really what that involves for students is giving us descriptions. So they might be describing observations that they might make of these interactions, or science ideas that are related to them, or they might simply describe an effect of the interaction. So I've given you some quick examples there. So in terms of observation, Earth orbits around the Sun every 365.25 days. So they're very factual. You know, the Sun rises in this particular position or is at this particular angle at a certain time of day. So they are just simply observations of things that they can either see or that they have obtained through secondary data. Your science ideas, so if we think about a key one there, the Earth is tilted on its axis. So it's a basic science idea that is obviously crucial to understanding these interactions. And then lastly, effects. So what is an effect? An example there, in New Zealand during summer it is warmer and there is more solar radiation. So at this achievement level, things are reasonably easy for them if they have a good understanding of the interactions. They should be able to pull out a number of these types of descriptions. If we step up to merit on the next slide. So merit asks us to explain the effect on the Earth of interactions between the Sun, Earth and Moon system. Now this requires students to link their science ideas and observations together to provide an explanation. So they may be explaining the interaction itself, or they may explain the effect. So we've got those two examples there. Seasons are caused by the tilt of the Earth's axis in relation to the Sun as it orbits the Sun. And then in terms of effect, New Zealand experiences warmer temperatures and more solar radiation during summer as the southern hemisphere is tilted towards the Sun at this time. So they are linking an observation with a science idea. So that is what you're looking at for merit. Now the step up to excellence on our next slide takes it a step further. So we've got that word analyze in here. So we are analyzing the effect. Now the real key thing here is they're already starting to integrate their science ideas with their observations, but the key thing that you are looking for is their ability to be able to discuss temporal and latitudinal variation in the effects of the interactions. That shows a much higher level of understanding, and that's what we're looking for at Excellence, is that they realise that what we might experience here in New Zealand is not going to be exactly the same, even within New Zealand, but definitely within various different latitudes on Earth and at different times. So I've just given you an example there about comparing New Zealand's latitude with Antarctica in terms of the types of seasons that are experienced. So this is the sort of thing that we are looking for excellence. So that's the key thing as we start to look at some of these exemplars that we will be looking at. I'll give you just a very quick chance. I know we've got a few people on tonight. If anybody's got any questions that they want to ask at this point, I'll just have a look at the chat and see if we've got anything. Feel free to unmute if you'd like to jump in and say something. I don't think we've got anything there at the moment. Be a couple of seconds. Most of this is probably reasonably familiar to you at this point because we have run a few webinars. Okay, Najim, we might jump to this first exemplar and I'll pass over to you.
All right, so this is from a pilot question that was in 2022, and the task at that time was basically questions that were broken down into smaller sections, and they had a resource that they were looking at for each part of that question. Some parts of the questions would go to achieve, some would go to merit, some would go to excellence. So if you look at this particular question and just its resources at the moment, it says, with reference to the resource, explain why the direction of the sun in our sky is east to west. So they're really just being asked to explain at this point. They're not being asked to integrate or compare between latitudes or anything like that at this point, but they are giving some diagrams to kind of have a look at what's going on. And if we just look at some of our responses here, we can have a moment to kind of decide whether these responses might be at the achieved, not achieved, merit level, and so on. So let's have, whoops, sorry, too far. There we go. So let's just take a moment to kind of read through those, and we'll have a think as to which one might be at which level. So for student A, the Earth rotates once on its own axis every day, spinning from west to east. The Earth, so from the Earth, the sun appears to rise in the east and then set in the west. So that's student A. Student B, the sun rotates on its axis from west to east. So they just very quickly just described a rotation there. Student C, Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours from east to west. Okay, so they've described a rotation, but it's not really quite the right direction. And then student D, sorry, I'm just going to move this so I can read the whole thing. This is because the Earth rotates every 24 hours. And as the Earth rotates from our perspective, the sun seems to rise from the east and sets in the west. Okay, so from most of them, we do have some kind of description of a rotation. One of them doesn't quite have the right direction for the rotation. And if we kind of break this down, you'll see that two of these pretty much are at the achieved level. One is at the not achieved level, and another one's at the merit level. Okay, so the way that we can kind of differentiate them is that if you look at student B and student C, both of them are just a quick description of a rotation, but student C has not really said the right direction of the rotation. So that's going to be our not achieved example there. Student B has described the rotation and has given the direct correction. So that is very quickly an achieved example. Student A has given a little bit more detail. Rotates once on its axis every day, spinning from west to east. And then so from Earth, the sun appears to rise in the east and set in the west. Okay, and let's look at that compared to student D. This is because the Earth rotates every 24 hours. As the Earth rotates, our perspective from the sun seems to rise from the east and sets in the west. So the difference between those two seems a little bit subtle, but you can see for one of them, student A, they've given the direction of the rotation for the Earth and linked that to the perspective that the sun appears to be moving. Whereas student D, they've said that it rotates and they've given the perspective, but they haven't clearly linked it to the direction that the Earth is rotating. So student D would be another achieved, kind of on its way to merit, but not quite there. Student A would be at a merit level though. So we'll go to our next exemplar. And back to you,
That's me
Mike.
again.
Mhm.
So this is another question from 2022. So students have obviously been provided with some tabulated data concerning sunrise and sunset times in 2 different locations on summer solstice. And the question there is, using the information to the left, explain why Auckland and Dunedin have varying amounts of daylight on both the winter and summer solstices, sorry, tongue around that today, refer to the path of the sun during the year and differences in latitude. So they are given a little bit of guidance there right at the end of the question on things that they should be considering. So it's really key that they are using the data that has been provided to them. And I think from memory, there was also students had some information which described what was meant by summer and winter solstice, which was part of the merit part of this question. So if we have a look at a couple of student responses to this, we flick to the next one. We'll give you a few seconds to have a read through each of those. If anybody wants to sort of throw something in the chat and say what they maybe have a think about what grade student A and student B might be, and maybe put their possible reasons, that would be really cool. So we'll give you a few seconds. I'll read through them, but if you want to add something in the chat, would be wonderful. So student A, Dunedin is further south than Auckland, which means that the sun will rise earlier and set later in the summer, resulting in longer days. On the summer solstice, the sun is at its southernmost point in our sky, which means that it will rise even earlier and later than the rest of the summer. This results in over an hour difference in day length between Dunedin and Auckland. Student B, Auckland and Dunedin have varying sunlight due to the latitude of the cities, as well as the Earth's tilt on its axis. Summer solstice, the southern hemisphere is at its maximum tilt towards the sun, meaning more hours of sunlight. As latitude increases, the daylight length increases. So as Dunedin is at a greater latitude than Auckland, it has a longer day length. In winter, southern hemisphere is at its maximum tilt away from the sun, meaning daylight is shorter and the sun is lower in the sky. Therefore, Dunedin at a higher latitude has a shorter day length than Auckland as it's tilted further away. Anybody want to offer what they think the grades might be for those two? Looks like Kaz might be going to have a go. Okay, I'm not actually set. If anybody else can see, I can't see if it's showing me that somebody's typing. Oh yeah, here we go. Ian, student A being a merit. And I would agree with that one there, Ian. So we have a look at what student A has done, and Kaz agrees. She thinks student, what have we got? M achieved, and students B think is an E. Oops, I think it was student A. Oh, so you think it might be an A for achieved for A? So let's have a look at that one. So we've got 2 different answers there, both in agreement about an E for student B. So if we have a look at student A, what they have given us, they've given us some observations. So they've talked about the sun will rise earlier and set later in summer. So that's an observation. They've talked about longer days. That's an effect, but it's still a description. They've given us a bit of an idea about what summer solstice is, that it's when the sun is at its southernmost point in our sky. And really, I think what makes them get to, and it is probably a lower level merit, but it is getting there, is they then go on, they use those words, which means. So they are trying to make a link there. So they're saying, which means it will rise even earlier and later than the rest of the summer. So it's they like I said, it would be a lower level merit, but it is they have actually got an explanation there. And we've got a question there from Rachel. So yeah, as we approach, so you're 0 latitude at the equator, and as you move towards the poles, we get where we increase in latitudes. We call that a higher latitude. Rachel, in answer to your question there. Ooh,
It just feels like it's going the wrong way, right? We always think because you're going south.
Yeah.
Yeah. Learn something.
It's just the way they always do it. So we always say, I mean, generally, I mean, like if you were right at the pole, you'd be at 90 degrees. But so we always start at 0 at the equator, and you're increasing in latitude as you move away from the equator. So New Zealand, I mean, what are we sitting at? Around about
depends on where.
35, probably at the top.
Yeah, down to about 40,
down to what are we getting? 55,
44, 45. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just googled Dunedin's 45.8.
Yeah, and Auckland sits at about 38.
Yeah. So I mean, it is sort of, that does feel a bit weird the way it's done, but that's how latitude works. So if we have a quick look at our student B there, so student B, they've got some basic ideas just in the science ideas in that first sentence where they talk about it's due to the latitude and the tilt, but they haven't actually explained anything. So they've identified what those ideas are. They then go on, they give an observation, summer solstice, science idea, summer solstice again is that it's maximum tilt towards the sun. But where they start to explain things is where they get to, as latitude increases, the day length increases. So as Dunedin's at the greater latitude in Auckland, it has a longer day length. And then they do a similar thing for winter. So that is where they get up to the excellence. So, and they also bring in the idea, they've talked about the tilt. So they've not just talked about latitude, they've talked about the tilt and how the tilt is going to affect how much radiation they're receiving as well, and how the latitude relates to that as well. So hopefully that shows you a little bit of an idea of the difference between those two. So it's me again, I think, for the next question. Yep. So we'll flick on to our exemplar 3. So last year they moved away from having sort of the little individual parts within a question, and what they moved to were 3 sort of single questions which had bullet points, as you can see here, to sort of direct. So more like, I suppose, our old sort of, they're more like the sort of traditional what used to be level 2 style questions, but they've been broken up into the ABCs these days. But so looking at this one here, this was on lunar phases. So discuss the different phases of the moon shown in the resource book, and I've given you the resources that they had. So that image was from Science Learning Hub, and then they had that tabulated data of moonrise times. In your answer, you should explain why we see these different phases of the moon, why the lunar cycle, new moon to new moon, takes 29.5 days, and why the moon rises at different times of the day. So if we flick on to that next slide, we'll have a look at an exemplar. So I'll give you a few minutes to have a read through that. So remember what you're looking for. So think about, where are the observations? Where's some science ideas there? Have they linked them? Have they talked about temporal or latitudinal differences at all? This is obviously just part of, I think this one was actually their total answer for this question. So just take a few moments and then we'll unpack what we saw in it. Again, if you want to chuck something in the chat with what you are noticing, that would be great. You might like to have a guess at what grade you think it might have had or been awarded for this particular one. Okay, we might have a go at unpacking it, I think. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So what I've done, we've if we do the first click, I've sort of highlighted a few things on here so that we can see how I was unpacking it. And Kaz, I see you're gonna and Ian are putting something in there while we're doing this. So we'll just get that. You just do that first click for us, Najee.
Yeah, is it coming up?
Yep, it has.
Okay.
Okay, so what we've got highlighted there are what I would regard as some of those basic observations. So as the moon orbits the Earth, we see different parts of it lit up. So that's an observation. When we can't see the lit side, we call that a new moon. So you could say that you've got both an observation there and the basic science idea, because they're giving the what it's called. And then same thing there, when we see it fully lit up, it's called a full moon. We've got the observation that the lunar cycle is 29.5 days, but in fact they were given that, so that wouldn't actually count towards anything. And then they've made the statement there, moons rise at different, or the moon rises at different times. And again, they basically worked that out from looking at the table of data that they were given. So those were the sort of the key observations that we can see then. If we click again, okay, so the bits I've highlighted here in blue are what I regard as the science ideas. So they've that first one there, they've basically explained what a new moon is. So they've given you the science idea, or they've described what a new moon is. The moon is in between the Earth and the sun. So the side of the moon which is lit by the sun is facing away from us. And then obviously if you follow on from there, they've then said what that results in. And then they've done a similar thing there for the full moon. They've explained the positionings of the sun and the moon and the Earth, and then explained how that produces a full moon for us from Earth. So because they've actually linked those, they've got two explanations there. They've linked the observation to the science ideas, and so we have got a merit. It hasn't gone far enough to get to an excellence, and the reason it hasn't is if we go down to that bottom part there, moon rises at different times each day, depending on which phase it's in and depending on its orbit and Earth's rotation. So they've got some idea of why, but they didn't actually go any further to try and explain it. So if they'd actually taken those ideas there and actually started to explain out what they were meaning, they would have been getting up to an excellence. But instead, what they've got are nice explanations of two of the phases. So this was in fact awarded an M5. It didn't get an M6. Reason being that they hadn't explained why the lunar cycle takes 29.5 days correctly. So if they'd managed to do that part as well, they would have got to an M6. So like I said, nearly getting there. They've got some ideas around it, but I suspect either they ran out of time or they just chose to stop at that particular point. That's our exemplar 3. And so what did we say? So Ian, would this be okay? Hopefully we've explained that. And then Kaz, last sentence, yeah, it's not quite enough to actually give that temporal difference. So hopefully we've explained that for you as well. So Najee, we'll jump to our last exemplar and have a look at exemplar 4.
Okay.
And I'll pass over to you.
Sure. So exemplar 4 is again from the 2023 pilot, where we're looking at bullet points, and they're basically submitting more of an extended response to cover those bullet points. So this particular one is taking a look at tides, and it's asking us in particular, or asking the students, sorry, in particular, to take a look at just how tides form in general, why the spring and neap tides occur every 14 days, and that if you've been given a table to kind of see a little bit more about the timing of that, and particularly why Aotearoa experiences king tides, which are also known as perigean spring tides, at irregular intervals of time. So those students would kind of have to unpack exactly what's going on there too. And you can see that in the table too, they said it was approximately 7 months, and the word approximate is hopefully what the students can kind of unpack there. Okay, so let's take a look at the exemplar. And again, the exemplar, we're going to be looking for the observations as well as the science ideas, as well as any explanations that are looking at latitudinal or temporal variations over time. So I'll give you a moment to read that and see if we can find the observations first. Okay, so as you're having a think there, think about particularly what was the observation, what was the science idea that was explaining that observation, so we can start to look at how to bridge from achieve to merit. And sorry, I'm not able to see any comments in there. Mighty, are you seeing anything coming through in there?
Yeah, they're starting to type, but we haven't quite
Okay,
got
yeah,
one
I'll
yet.
give it a moment. Yeah.
See the little bubbles flickering.
Yeah.
No, we haven't got anything coming up at the moment. Maybe
All right,
maybe
that's
start
fine.
to unpack
Yep,
it.
we'll go ahead
Najin,
and get started
if
to
they
pack it.
wanna
Yep.
jump.
All right, so yeah, pretty much here's our observations that have been highlighted out in yellow, and hoping that's coming through. I think there's a little bit of a delay between when I click and when it comes up. So hopefully here you can see the observations are really just looking at the height of the tide. So the highest high tides, the lowest low tides, when the moderate tides occur, and so on. Okay. Now the explanation behind that
We
will
haven't
be
got
what pops
the
up. Oh, did it not do the? Oh, did it?
it's not come up yet, Chris.
Oh, you're not seeing the first highlighting yet?
No, it's not come up.
Okay, let me see if I go back and forward again.
Yep, there you go. No, it's come up.
When in doubt, do it again. So yeah, there's our
Here's the one.
observations. Mhm. Okay. So this is strictly like what we would observe here on Earth. And so, yeah, just the highest high tides, lowest low tides, and so on, the tide height. All right. To explain that and start looking at the merit, we basically need to be looking at exactly the science ideas behind why that is occurring. So that's again going to come more into like the positions of the moon, the sun, and the earth. So if we start having a think about that, and you can probably see that that's often wrapped around the observations if they've structured it well. There's also a little bit of an explanation at the bottom too around king tides. So I'll give that a moment and hope that it appears.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, cool. So you can see the positioning of the sun, moon, and earth, and its explanation as it's leading in toward the highest high tides. And then they also talk about the neap tide being and the positioning of the sun, moon, and earth when the neap tides occur and how that leads into the more moderate tide levels. At the bottom, there is also an explanation for what a king tide is. So when the moon is at its perigee, which means it's at its point in its orbit when it is the closest to Earth. So it's going to be not just a spring tide at that point, but it's actually going to be a king tide, a perigean spring tide. Okay, so the last thing that we kind of need to unpack then is, did they talk about latitudinal or temporal variations in there? So in our case, most likely, we're going to be looking at temporal variations because they asked us to unpack whether it's what the timing of the king tides and why they're irregular. So take a moment to read around that and see if we've managed to do that for this student.
Feel free to put something in the chat if you think maybe they have managed to do that.
Mm-hmm. And if there's anything else that you notice too that you feel like is a point of contention or maybe not quite correct.
Okay, we haven't got anything coming up at the moment, Nadine, so
Okay.
let's keep moving.
That's all right. I was just going to click on forward. So here we go. So I think at the bottom here, they do kind of start to discuss a little bit more about the intervals as to what's going on. They talk about how regularly, the full moon or the new moon happens and where that is versus like when perigee must happen. So they start to unpack a little bit more about like why those things are not always going to happen at the same time. And they don't really go into a detailed explanation around that. So we would still, I think, give this an excellence. I think this was given an E7, wasn't it, Mairi?
Yeah, it
Yeah?
was given an
Mhm.
E7. Yep.
Yeah. So
Their explanation, I think, for not giving them an E8 was because they hadn't discussed the reasons for the frequency of high and low tides and spring and neap tides.
yeah, so I think where they fell down a little bit was that middle section, this part that's not highlighted, where they said, they said 14 days between each phase, new moon, first quarter, full moon, and third quarter. It's not quite right there. So I think if they'd been able to connect that in and give the right timings between those main phases, might have helped boost their answer a bit.
Brilliant.
All right. Cool.
Have we got any questions that anybody would like to ask at this point before we continue on? Okay, I think we might keep moving on. So,
Okay,
Nadine,
yep.
I'll get you to click
onward.
on to
Yep.
the next one. Okay, so some of these next couple of slides have been explained before, but we're just going to quickly run through these just to refamiliarize you, because I think once our two piloteers start talking, it will help support what they are going to be discussing today. So this is obviously an external examination, well, not examination, but an external assessment. It needs to be digitally submitted, and final date of submission is the 30th of October. But the materials will be provided to schools in term 3, week 1. So if we click to that next slide, Nadine.
Mm-hmm.
So although these are made available, obviously you can't show them to your students until the time of the assessment. So as we explained last year, the pilot involved the students answering 3 questions. That's exactly what they will get again this year. So it would be very much like the exemplars that are online currently. And what they're suggesting, which is quite interesting, and I'll be interested to hear what the piloteers say when they come to talk, they are recommending that students are only given 2 hours to complete this assessment. And that obviously, they're saying it during a school scheduled period, which almost implies that they're saying that it should be 2 hours continuous. So as I said, be really interested to see what the piloteers say around that. Students can respond use in either writing or orally. So obviously if they did an oral submission, you'd need to think about how you can produce a written transcript. So there are a lot of translating apps, like I think it's Otter, which will just provide a transcript of any recording that you make. So we click on to that next one.
Mm-hmm.
So concerning conditions of assessment, obviously this is an external, so they're not allowed to use any other material other than the resource booklet and task sheet which is provided. So they can't be using the internet, they can't bring other evidence into the room. And if it is not a continuous 2-hour period, they cannot take the resource booklet or task away with them. What's now coming in everywhere, and you'll all be familiar with this, is obviously no use of chatbots, generative AI, any other types of tools which may help them. And obviously it's the school's responsibility to make sure that these things aren't happening. So you need to consider how you are going to monitor that. And that's what it clearly states there about authenticity, that teachers must closely supervise the process of evidence collection. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass over now to our two wonderful piloteers who have got a wealth of information for us. And if we flick to that next slide, Najim, we've got we did come up with a few questions for them to consider, but I know they've also got some other reflections which they're going to share with us. So we'll pass over to you, Melanie, first of all.
Okay.
So it's all yours.
My experience of this standard was that we were one of the few schools that did not do this digitally. We had our students handwrite it. Last year, a lot of the schools had very different ways of going about the assessment. It wasn't as tight in terms of the specifications. They basically said it should be easily to be done within a week, up to 4 hours would be recommended, blah, 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 blah. So some did it as an exam, single, you get it, you're done at the end of the time and you're done. Others had 3 periods and they did 1 question each period. Others, like for us, we had 2 separate 2-hour blocks in our exam timetable, in our exam week, and they had 2 hours to do, and then they had to leave everything there, walk away, and then come back if they wanted to, and then they had up to another 2 hours to complete. So yeah, that was how we went about it, assessing it. And as I said, we hand wrote ours, and that was the world's biggest headache in terms of uploading and submitting it through the new portal. Very time consuming, but it did solve the authenticity issue. So that's how we got around that side of things, because we're a Google school, and so it's harder to then make sure that things are done fully within the setup, the system that was existing at the time anyway. How do we go about preparing students for the assessment? We had a range of things. We did videos. We prepared a separate little workbook which sort of went through all the key content that had activities to like write on diagrams so they could fill in the phases of the moon and that sort of stuff with the definitions. We had we presented the information from an understand know structure, so the bigger concept that we wanted them to understand, and in order to do that they really needed to know some key points or facts or processes. And we also went about this in a way of trying to train them towards being able to write these longer answer style questions. So we would summarize our stuff with tasks along the lines of writing a closed paragraph, which they then had to share around with each other, and it had a minimum of like 6 blanks or whatever on a specific concept. Get them to answer a question. So I had one task sheet which was phases of the moon literacy skills, was things like describe how the moon changes in the night sky in no more than 150 words, because we were also part of the word limit trial, which thankfully is not part of this year's thing. And putting in definitions, writing a appeal paragraph that included some key terms and phrases, so getting them to really practice using the right language in a written form. So that's how we sort of went about it as a group, come up with an explanation as to why it takes the moon 27 days to orbit the Earth, but the lunar cycle is 29.5. So just getting them to work together and bounce off with each other in those sorts of ways, really bringing in that literacy focus and bringing those literacy skills in terms of structuring their answers. The students quite enjoyed our format. Most of them fairly much did it all within the 2 hours. Very few came back. Some of them played the game quite tactically, and they basically came and looked at the paper in the first 2 hours and did nothing much, and then came back and did the entire thing in the second. And yeah, it was really interesting to see how they responded to it. Those who had made the most of the literacy tasks throughout the teaching of the concepts and the ideas really did much better than those who just sort of tried to memorize key facts and figures and how to draw a diagram. So yeah, that's how we went about it.
Awesome.
Anything else they want to?
We got any questions? We might get some questions as people consider things, but no, that was really interesting. So you basically had 2 blocks, you were saying, for them. So
yeah, we did it in 2 2-hour blocks. Timetabling for us wouldn't have worked to do it just within the school weeks in terms of some classes, because we have a 75-minute period. Just the way it would have worked, some would have always been after lunch and some would have been always early, and the way the timing of the classes worked, I think that year our timetable structure also meant that you might have only had them twice that week and someone else had them 3 times that week. So it's when you timed it in terms of who knew and who didn't. If we were doing it the same this year, I would put it into the school exam week for that reason, just that everybody does it at the same time, rather than some classes get the exposure early to the questions and others get it later. It does have that puts that first class at a disadvantage over others. So yes, I would run it in the same way. The timing, we would rather have done it, had this resource earlier so we could run it within the Matariki to bring it in more contextually. So we actually started introducing the topic at the end of, or about 3 weeks towards the end of term 2, and started teaching it through, and then sort of almost stopped and then came back to it for our exam week, which was about 3 weeks after we finished the unit. But yeah, I think for authenticity, the handwriting was certainly an easier thing to deal with. Yes, you can make them turn the Wi-Fi off and you can do that, but just managing that was harder. So yeah, handwritten was good, but it was just very time consuming in terms of scanning and uploading. So yeah.
So if you were doing it in the examination slot, how long would you provide them?
Well, given that this year's they're recommending 2 hours, I would say most of our students were 2 hours. It took them 2 hours. Some of the weaker students, so we had, when I say weaker, not necessarily weaker in knowledge, but they have handwriting issues and things. There were some that have digital devices. That was fine. That was managed separately because that's their special assessment conditions and things. I would probably give them the 2 hours, but I would probably make that final call once the task came through, and if I felt the students were up to it in terms of being able to get that literacy across, I might give them an extra half an hour just for processing time, get through, read it, think about it. So yeah.
I think we've got another question coming through from Keith.
My answers are producing more questions.
That's always good.
It is good. To give you an idea of the sorts of the understands and knows and things like that. So we would have like understand that the seasons change throughout the year because the Earth orbits the sun on an angle. And then the know would be what are the seasons and why they differ in timing in each hemisphere, and why the seasons change throughout the year, and why the seasons experienced in the tropics are different to seasons in the mid-latitudes and poles. And then we would have some key learning points: what define a year, define insolation, explain how the axial tilt creates the seasons, and that sort of stuff. So we broke it down then into, right, tick box, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and because I've done this, I can now show that I know these things. And then because of that, I obviously can understand this overall topic. That's kind of how we approached it. Students use the option of drawing annotated diagrams, very few. So that was another reason why we went handwritten, because we were trying to provide equity, because those who are on a tablet with a stylus can produce a diagram really easily. If you're on a laptop, and a lot of our students, we are a device school, a lot of our students switch to laptops when they hit senior school, and so therefore they have to go into in their docs, because we're Google Docs, which then they also had to then save it as a PDF, which is a whole other deal. But they then had to go on to create an image and then use just the shapes and everything to do it that way, which takes longer. So we thought, to make it easier, we will get them to do it by hand, so everyone's on the same page literally, and everyone's on the same playing field. But because there were diagrams in the resources, a lot of them just referred to the diagram in the resource instead of drawing their own, or if they did, it was a very simple thing. But no, most of them just wrote. They just described and explained in an essay type style answer.
Cool. Awesome. Rosie, looking forward to hearing how you guys went.
Sorry, trying to unmute. Yeah, it actually sounds like there's a lot of similarities between how we delivered the assessment as schools. So we also did ours handwritten because we're also a Google school. And so we did it slightly differently because we have lessons which are an hour and 20 minutes. So we, I'll start with how we prepared them for the assessment. We gave students a lot of examples at the beginning of lessons, which we then used to kind of get students to practice those questions, and then created a workbook, used like about a week or two of revision time to get students really practicing their own answers, and then how to break down questions and identifying the command words and what the question wanted them to say and things like that. And then we moved in our derived grade exam week, we got them to sit the previous year's paper. And so I made a rubric and broke down exactly how each student could have achieved merit and excellence. And then we spent feedback lessons going through that rubric and their own answers to break down exactly how they could have gotten to merit or excellence as opposed to achieved. So they had a familiarity with how we were going to deliver the assessment, and a familiarity of the format of the assessment as well, which was really useful. And the students responded really well to that. We did it handwritten, and we did 2 questions in the first lesson. And we only gave them materials for those 2 questions. And then in our second lesson on it, we did our 3rd question. And so the students could only spend the lesson time that they had on those 2 first questions. And then in the second lesson could finish their 3rd question. One of the issues we ran into was students just writing their names on, I know it's really small, but students writing their names on the top of the exam paper, which obviously means it's not anonymous. So you have to be really clear to make sure that they only write their NSN number, which I thought I'd gone through multiple times, but you can never say it enough. And I think a lot of the students really enjoyed it. And actually a lot of our students ended up drawing diagrams. I got a really high level of achieved where I was quite worried with my students, and I think it's partially because of their ability to use diagrams to help them remember how they were going to explain things and things like it helped my students who I don't think were necessarily comfortable with the handwritten component of it. We did it in exam conditions, and yeah, I think if we were going to do it again, we would consider when we do it so that every student has parity in terms of like no student's done it earlier than another. So altogether students got about 2 hours to do the assessment, but it was spread over a period of time, and I would be really loath to give that bit up because I think the students really benefited from having that break between the questions. I think at year 11 they don't really have that stamina, and it gives them a more fair opportunity to demonstrate what they know by chunking it up a little bit more, and they did really respond quite well to that. I think other reflections I think we would spend a lot more time working on the literacy component and how students are explaining and building on their answers. I think they really struggled to get past achieved, and that came down to basically the literacy. So if I did that again, I think I would want to do it on computers if there was a way to do that. And yeah, I think because otherwise I just can't see how this with the handwriting. I think that is something that I underestimated how much students would struggle with that. And so I think if we had one external where they were able to do it on computers and one external where it's handwritten, it would maybe give them more of a chance to showcase what they can do. Yeah, sorry.
Cool. One question I got there. So when you're chunking up, did they only get like one question with its resource at that time? They didn't see all 3 of them at once? Is that
No,
how
so
you managed it?
we only showed them the resources for the questions they had, and then they saw the 3rd resource for the second lesson.
And that's where they differ from us. And then there were some other schools that literally did one question and then the next question and then the next question. And then, and then there was others got all 3 questions at once, and there's your 3 hours.
Yeah.
And that was one of the frustrations about this. So
yeah, it's quite hard to make sure there's equity in terms
across.
of across the whole country, really, I suppose, with regard to it. But yeah, that's I suppose a question for much later and for NZQA to decide on at a later stage.
I agree with the chunking. I think that our weaker students did better off by having that time to process and think and then come back and have a break and then come back to it, rather than having it all just like an end of year exam, even though we did it in the exam week.
I think it encourages them to think about it more, to give each question more justice as well. I think if they're not rushing to finish the whole exam, they're not kind of just trying to write down everything they know. They're actually engaging with that one question and really fully trying to explain it, which I think they do need to do for this task.
Yeah, and it may, now I think about it, yeah, it may be if we were to run this, because we're not running this, we've semesterized our courses this year, so it doesn't work for us. But if we were running it, then yes, I'm sure we would certainly have that discussion. We would certainly be open to the thought of doing one question on one day, one question on the next day, one question on the other day. But we would do it during the exam week, so it's set with everybody's doing it at the same time, same day, for authenticity. In fairness, we got around the writing names thing. I literally took a blank Google Doc and I wrote a space at the top that just said NSN number and a line for them to write the NSN number into, and then just a whole heap of lines, and I had page blank of blank. And so we gave them paper that was photocopied into that format rather than refill. And I think out of the 72 students, we had one name on one piece of paper, which got picked up on the first day. So they were able to then fully scribble it out. So that's how we got around that.
We didn't see that coming at all. It was next time. For sure.
So yeah. How would you prefer Earth and Space to set up the mock for this one? Oof. I would say you need to be, I would recommend being consistent with the assessment conditions.
Yeah, I'll just add in there that you don't get derived grade opportunities for the submission-based externals. So your mock would be a practice but isn't used for derived grade.
No, sorry, we just did it in our derived grade exam week.
Yeah, because
we used that as the opportunity to do it.
Yep, and we had the same thing. We took some derived grades, just that there was for the reporting purposes only, just to go, this is where I'm roughly sitting at. Yeah, I had the same problem with names on papers all the time. Everything's always names. But yeah, I would say just one part of it would just be to recommend, say, look, this is designed to be sat this way, or something, just to give greater clarity as to, you know, for equity between schools, you need to consider how you're doing it. So just, you know, if you are thinking about doing it as a 2-hour once off or a 3-hour one-off block, you may be disadvantaging your students compared to other schools. Yeah. I think, yeah.
It's a bit of a hard one, and yeah, we're not going to know until I suppose next year how different schools have approached it.
Yeah, but literacy is the big thing. This is to be teach the content through literacy skills. Approach this entire unit as a literacy unit with the context of astronomy of the Earth, Sun, Moon. Not this is the Earth, Sun, Moon system with literacy. That's the best way to get through this. Yeah.
Brilliant.
From my perspective.
So some wonderful reflections. Thank you very much. I'm conscious we're 5 minutes over time, but I think we've had some really, really good discussion tonight, and hopefully you found it useful. Najin, if you can just flick to the next slide. I have put in the chat a little bit earlier for those of you attending this link. We ask that you complete this very last evaluation for us as our last webinar, just to give us some feedback on how you have found tonight. Hopefully it has been of use to you. I want to say a massive ngā mihi nui to the team tonight. It has been a pleasure working with you all. And as said, I think we've had some really valuable insights, especially from our piloteers. You've been through it, something that the rest of us haven't. And I know that kāko all around the country will value what you have shared tonight. So at this point, I'm going to close off our last webinar for term 1, and we'll do that with a karakia. So you can flick to the last slide. Here we go. Ka whakairia te tapu kia wātia ai te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai, hui e, taiki e. Thank you, everybody, and all the best with your work with the students for the rest of the year. Ngā mihi nui. Ka kite. We stopped recording.